All right, it's my pleasure to welcome you today, Caroline Brewer, to our little interview with a children's book author. And I should say, interview with a children's multiple book author. Isn't that right?
That is right. Thank you so much for having me, Claudia. And thank you to all the women of the organization. I am thrilled to be here. As you said, I'm Caroline Brewer. I am the author of 12 books, including this newest one called Darius Daniels' Game On, which is my first children's adventure novel. And this book has more than 10 forms of poetry. It's a verse novel. It's what I call a rhythmic novel. And why I love this book so much is because this book tells a story about an 11-year-old boy named Darius Daniels who goes on this journey after he gets snatched into a video game. But it was written based on all of my years of experience working with children who I call hungry readers. And these are children who are hungry to learn to read, hungry to learn to write. And I learned so much working with those children. I've worked with children from 8 different states and jurisdictions and at all levels. But most of the children I've worked most closely with have been children who have been diagnosed as in need of special education services. And so these are children on the lower grade level for reading. And I have just seen these children demonstrate their thirst to be better readers and better writers. And so I took all of that into account when I wrote this book. So it's my favorite of all the books because it gave me the opportunity to pour everything that I learned from children and from teachers into this book.
Caroline, when was that book, Darius, published?
It was actually published right before COVID-19 hit. Um, and it was late 2019, so we were just in the beginning of having what I call book tasting parties. And these are parties where there might be food served because there are some scenes in the book where there's food, and also where you get a little taste of the book. The book is a very musical book, so it has one of the poems is called "I love books like kids love candy. I love books like beaches love sandy. I love books like corn loves to pop. I love books like hip loves to hop. I love books like." So during our book launch parties, we were able to do that with children and their parents. And we visited my hometown library and packed the place with about 70 parents and children and teachers. And I bring drummers and other kinds of musicians. I bring musical instruments to the book parties, and we just have a good time feeling the power of words. And that's the thrust of my work, is helping children experience the joy of language, the joy of learning, the joy of words, whether they're poetry or prose, and of course the joy of stories.
Wonderful. And just that one little excerpt that you read makes me want more. Would you be willing to read a little bit from that book or any one of your books?
Oh, sure,
All right.
absolutely.
We'll sit
Okay,
back and listen.
okay, great. Let's see. We are going to read from a chapter, and all of the chapters are very short. I don't know if you guys can see them.
Yeah.
Lots and lots of white space. Some of the chapters are just 1 page long. So this chapter is called Head Fake the Snake. The hairy snake with a yellow glow was gaining on him, about to rain on him, slash into his skin. How could he win? Deed zoomed up the stairs like a track superstar or an Indy race car. He couldn't go back to the scene of the smiling master, but if he could get inside a door, he could put his plan into action. A security guard was locking the doors. "Oh, snap," Dee roared. "Let me in, let me in." If there were ever a time he needed a friend, it was then. The guard rushed to pull out his keys and ran to the door, yanked Dee inside, thought for a second about where they could hide. Dee looked through the glass. He was all out of gas. But the Viper, she was hyper. She went mad, slashing at the outside glass like a machete cutting tall grass. She stabbed and stabbed and jabbed and stabbed until every door shook.
You are a poet. That
Thank
was
you.
wonderful. How do you ever craft those words together to not only make them into a story, but also to have that rhyme? How does that work? Does your
Well,
brain
this
work like that?
Well, that's a funny thing about me. I think my brain does work like that. But it is work. It is work. I keep Rhyme Zone handy. I have rhyming dictionaries. So I read a lot of poetry and I listen to a lot of music. I love music and I love all kinds of music. And so all of these influences really help me when I'm in the course of writing. I love when I'm really in the zone and I just have the music on and all of a sudden I'll hear a lyric and it'll make me think, oh, there's a way I can work with that in this story. And we know that children love music. All of us love music. We know that our brain is especially responsive to music. Our brain loves music. It loves rhythm. And when we set anything that we want to teach kids to rhythm, it's easier for them to absorb it. It's obviously much more enjoyable for them, but it really works. I once interviewed a high school teacher who taught um, math and science, and he said that he taught students the quadratic formula by teaching them row, row, row your boat to the rhythm of row, row, row your boat. So who would have ever thought? And he said other teachers kind of thought he was silly and laughed at him, but they would send their kids who had trouble learning the quadratic formula to his class. So that's what rhyming is, my specialty, and it was something that I didn't discover until I wrote my first children's book.
That's amazing. Now, how many books have you published already?
I have published 12 books, for eight for children.
Mhm.
Kara finds sunshine on, whoops, that's not Kara. Kara finds sunshine on a rainy day.
Mm.
That was the first children's book. And actually, the anniversary is coming up on 9/11. And lots of really beautiful things happen with this book. It's about a little girl who gets upset that it's raining outside, and her mother tells her stories about historical figures who had difficulty in life, but they learned to overcome their challenges with faith and hope. So Kara learns a lot about how to deal with these so-called rainy days by the stories that her mother told her. Go
I
ahead.
know I noticed that that book, it looks like a picture book. That's not a chapter book, is it?
Yes, all of the books before Darius Daniels came on were picture books.
Oh
And this
my.
one is especially exciting because
Oh, look at that.
these are the illustrators for children.
You had all those different illustrators?
Yes, the
Oh,
Harlem School of the Arts in New York City.
oh,
This is when I was living outside New Jersey. The Harlem School of the Arts. There was a musician, a violinist that I met, and he knew about my books, and he said, "Oh, you should come to the Harlem School of the Arts and do a book with us one day." And I said, "Absolutely, I would love to." And it just so happened that after Katrina hit the New Orleans area, I donated copies of Kara Fine Sunshine on a Rainy Day to them, but I didn't, I think I donated 25 and I didn't have many more. And so we ended up doing a brand new edition, this edition, just for those children. And I got to go to New Orleans and um, I met with close to 1,000 children and their teachers, and we read the book. And it was so amazing because it rained really hard the first day I got there. So it was a rainy day, but the social worker at the school wrote me this really beautiful letter and said, your visit brought the sunshine out. So that made my heart feel so good.
Absolutely. Now, what was that other book you held up and flashed
Ah,
that moment?
so this
Does
is a
that look
fun
like
book.
somebody familiar? Yeah. All right.
I'm glad you recognize him still.
Yeah.
This book is Barack Obama, a hip hop tale of King's dream come true. So this book, so many of my books were were written because somebody asked me to write a book and said, "Oh, could you write a book about this?" So there was a young woman who was an artist. My books were in an art gallery because the gallery owner loved the images, and she thought her customers would love the images too, because especially with Kara Fine Sunshine on a Rainy Day, they were like art, they were artwork. So this young woman who visited the gallery said, it was during the time that Obama uh, uh, was seeking the presidency, and she said, "Oh, I love your books, and I would love if you wrote a book about Obama." I said, "Well, I'm sure there are just going to be tons and tons of books about him." I said, "So I don't think it's something I'll do." But every time I saw her, she asked me about it. So finally, one night, I woke up in the middle of the night and I started writing this story, and it was a story that I thought would really work, where it was about his journey to becoming president. And this book was actually published before he won. So I predicted, I had to predict at the end of the story that he was going to win. But actually, after he won, then I went back and I added more details. So it's another hip hop rhyming story about that journey, but it's fictionalized. There are people from the City of Hope in
Hmm.
here,
Hmm.
and there are ratty rats
Oh,
who
wait,
try to
wait, isn't that Senator? No, never mind.
intimidate him,
Yeah.
and these are crabby crows flying in the air. So these are all the negative forces, and these are grouchy, crouchy frogs.
Oh my
So they're
goodness.
all just,
What a wonderful
representing
concept.
representing certain forces in society. But it really is a story about hope and keeping your faith when you have a dream,
Yeah.
and that's the message to children. And there's a little rap in here where the character Obama says, "My mother always told me that people are people, no matter their skin. The real you is the person that lives within." So
Wonderful. Wonderful. So, did you share a copy of that with President Obama? Did you send
You
him a copy?
know, I didn't get to put one in his hand, but I met his sister at an event. I gave her one. I met Arnie Duncan at another event and I gave him one. So I
Wow.
don't know, but I tell you, I am so sorry that I don't have a book that it's somewhere here, but it's not on my table. But I will tell you about it just quickly.
Okay.
And it's called For the Obamas, a Big Book of Thank Yous. Now, he didn't get the book, but I was a reading teacher at Concord Elementary here outside of Washington, D.C. And it was 2016, the Obamas were leaving. And my principal said that, National Writing Month was coming up, and uh, this was through NCTE. I was a member, and she said it would be lovely to do something to celebrate writing school wide. So I work with children from pre-K to sixth grade. I think we had 400 students in the school, and I saw 250 every week with some kind of reading or writing assignment. So I was working a lot with the third graders, and one of their standards was to learn how to write a thank you letter. Well, it turned out that most of the kids had never written a thank you letter. So I said, what if we write thank you letters to the president and Mrs. Obama to let them know how much we appreciated them, you know, serving our country? So we took on that project. It took months, but everybody wrote a letter. The pre-K and first graders, they wrote class letters, but we delivered them to the president and Mrs. Obama just weeks before they got out of office. He wrote back a beautiful thank you letter to the children, and I was able to include it in a book of their letters. It's a 275-page book, but just reading that book will make your heart melt when you see how thoughtful and funny and sweet the kids are with their thank you letters.
That is wonderful. And you're speaking to an audience of teachers. Some are retired, but many are still working with children. And what a great idea and a great way to integrate writing with, education, a book, and current events and all of that. I'm just so inspired by your story there.
Yes. So I am something of an accidental children's author. My background is in journalism. And in the summer of 2001, I left my journalism job and became a motivational speaker. Well, in September of that year, I was working with a group of parents in Paterson, New Jersey, and 9/11 happened. And like everybody else, we were, just depressed. We were sad. We were confused. It was shocking. And I was living outside of New York City. So, there was a huge impact in the community where I lived. And one night I went to bed, I woke up at midnight. And I really hadn't fallen asleep, but that's when I do most of my writing is midnight or after. And I wrote this poem called The Sun is Always Shining, Even When We Can't See It. And I read it to one of my best friends who was a second grade teacher. And she said, oh, you have to come to my class and read this poem to my children. And I said, oh no, this is really meant for adults. It was for the adults I was going to be working with. And she persisted. She bugged me for like 3 weeks. And so I turned it into a children's book, and I donated all the proceeds to homeless children in Nicaragua and children who were orphaned because of AIDS and the war in Uganda. As a journalist, I had covered the men who ran both of these organizations in support of these children. And so that book was Kara Finds Sunshine on a Rainy Day. And I have so many great stories from that book, but my friend, the teacher, her students, the way they responded, and I just kept getting asked by teachers, by daycare center, operators to come and read the story. So I also got asked to come and read to children in a group home for abused and neglected children. So I read to a group of boys and a group of girls. And the next day, maybe 2 days later, one of the group home counselors called and said, I hope you're sitting down. And I said, okay. So she said that there was a little boy, 11 years old, named Miles, who loved the book and had written me this really beautiful thank you letter. And the thank you letter said, thank you, Caroline and friends. Your story changed my life around. And the way his life was changed was that Miles had been in the group home for 6 months, and he was so traumatized by being separated from his mother that he never made any friends and he didn't speak. And she said after the reading of the book, he just blossomed, that he was all of a sudden opening up, talking, and making friends. I had no idea that something that came from me could have such an impact on a child. But Miles gave me confidence to continue as an author. And that's why I'm here now, 20 years later, because of my teacher friend and all the teachers who've invited me into their classrooms, and because of their students who've responded so beautifully.
I love that story, and I thank you for sharing that with us. Any last thing you want to say to us? Any advice for teachers? And of course, our teachers are everything from pre-K all the way up to adults. So anything you'd like to say?
Okay, yes, absolutely. I'd like to share. This is one of my books for adults. It's called The Happy Teacher and Students and Happy Students. And I've done a lot of trainings with this book. A lot of my books figure into these workshops, and the most, it has 11 R's in it, and the most important R is relationships. And so what I would encourage all teachers to do is to constantly be thinking about their relationships with children. One of the things that I found was that patience is the most important thing that I could give myself and that I could give children. I really saw miracles unfold when I was extraordinarily patient with children. And of course, if you're a teacher, you have to be a person who knows how to exercise patience. But I was also a teacher who could lose patience at times. But when I remember to exercise patience with children, including those 400 children who were writing those letters, and some, it was months later before they finished, but when they finished, they felt so proud, and it was a turning point in their lives as students. I found that they were no longer reluctant to read and no longer reluctant to write, that when they got over that really, really difficult assignment that scared them, terrified them because they'd never done it before and they didn't have confidence, that made all the difference. And it just obviously improved our relationship tremendously. So um,
Thank
that,
you. Be patient. That is great advice. And I'm just so inspired by your life and by your work and your dedication and your artistry and everything. So I want to thank you again for speaking to our women of Delta Kappa Gamma, the Alpha Chi chapter in St. Petersburg, Florida. And I hope that if you ever come to St. Petersburg, will come visit us, and you're always welcome to be a guest at one of our meetings. Thank you so
oh,
much.
thank you so much for having me. All the best to all of you. And I am coming to St. Petersburg. I have some great educator friends there. So you guys should be looking for me at a meeting sometime soon.
Definitely. Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you.